April 1, 1946. What would it feel like to run forward into a storm of steel, knowing that the screams you hear are not the enemy's, but your own men burning alive, and that your only weapon is a medical bag already soaked in blood? Operation Downfall, the largest invasion ever planned and never executed, was meant to be the final, apocalyptic chapter of World War II, a two-part assault called Operation Olympic and Operation Coronet that would have hurled millions of Allied soldiers onto the beaches and plains of mainland Japan. And at the center of this nightmare were combat medics, men trained to save lives while standing knee-deep in death, tasked with crawling through firestorms of artillery, machine gun crossfires, and kamikaze-infested kill zones to reach the wounded, because the planners knew from the horrors of Iwo Jima and Okinawa that this invasion would be unlike anything humanity had ever seen, with Japanese defenses designed not just to kill, but to psychologically break invaders. As entire civilian populations were mobilized, caves were turned into death traps, and every inch of ground was pre-sighted for slaughter. The medic under fire was expected to land with the first waves on Kyushu in Operation Olympic in November 1945, where intelligence reports predicted over 900,000 Japanese defenders and tens of thousands of aircraft reserved solely for suicide attacks. And while official casualty estimates varied wildly, some internal documents quietly warned of hundreds of thousands of Allied dead within weeks, meaning medics would have been forced to triage not in tents or rear areas, but on beaches slick with blood, deciding in seconds who might live and who would be left behind screaming, a horror already foreshadowed during the April-June 1945 Battle of Okinawa, where medics described nights filled with wounded men begging not for morphine, but for someone to hold their hand as Japanese infiltrators slipped through American lines, stabbing the injured and the healers alike. And it was lessons from Okinawa that shaped Downfall's medical planning, including stockpiling unprecedented quantities of plasma, bandages, and surgical kits, because evacuation by sea or air would be nearly impossible once the kamikaze waves began, forcing medics to perform amputations under fire, sometimes with only a flashlight clenched between their teeth. One classified scenario imagined beachhead hospitals being overrun within hours, with surgeons ordered to keep operating until captured or killed, while medics were trained to fight back if necessary, blurring the line between healer and soldier, a grim reality echoed by veterans of Peleliu, who recalled seeing medics shot deliberately by snipers because the Red Cross made them targets, a practice expected to be even more brutal in Japan, where surrender was considered dishonor, and planners feared scenes of mass suicide among civilians, something already witnessed when Okinawan families leapt from cliffs or detonated grenades rather than be captured, meaning medics might arrive too late to save anyone except themselves from the psychological collapse that followed such sights. Operation Coronet, scheduled for spring 1946, would have pushed toward Tokyo itself across the Kanto Plain, where intelligence warned of trenches filled with sharpened bamboo stakes, chemical weapon contingencies on both sides, and urban combat so savage that medics would be forced to crawl through collapsed buildings while fires consumed entire neighborhoods, listening to wounded soldiers trapped beneath rubble slowly suffocate, unable to be reached, an image that haunted planners who still remembered the screams from Manila in 1945 when civilians burned alive during street fighting. And among the most chilling aspects of Downfall was the expectation that Japanese medical personnel, ordered to fight to the death, would not treat Allied wounded, eliminating any hope of mercy, turning every battlefield into a closed loop of suffering where survival depended solely on one's own unit medic, many of whom were barely out of their teens. One projected after-action report described medics running low on morphine within days, forced to choose between easing pain and saving lives, while artillery barrages turned aid stations into craters, a scenario chillingly similar to the Battle of the Bulge, where frozen medics treated men whose limbs snapped like glass when cut away, but multiplied tenfold by the scale of Downfall. The war-life events that shaped these expectations were written in blood across the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Saipan, where medics learned that night was often worse than day, because the wounded cried louder in the dark and enemy soldiers crept closer. And in Japan, the darkness would be absolute, filled with civilians, soldiers, and medics, all screaming in the same language of terror. A horror so total that some planners privately questioned whether any human could endure it without breaking. And yet, buried in the classified files are stories of planned heroism, medics volunteering for the most dangerous sectors, knowing they would likely die, but refusing to let wounded men face their last moments alone, echoing real acts from Okinawa, where medics dragged comrades through knee-deep mud under machine gun fire, taking bullets meant for others. Because in war, the medic under fire becomes the last symbol of humanity, a walking contradiction in a world designed to erase compassion. And as the months dragged on and casualty projections climbed, the weight of downfall pressed heavily on leaders who understood that this operation would not just decide a war, but scar generations, physically and mentally, especially those tasked with saving lives amid organized annihilation. Until August 5, 1945 changed everything, and the invasion was canceled, leaving behind only plans, projections, and nightmares of what might have been. Nightmares still vivid enough to raise a final question that refuses to die. If Operation Downfall had gone forward, would courage have been enough to survive the horror that was waiting, or would humanity itself have been lost on the beaches of Japan?